All right, people, let's get into it. Today we're talking about two really interesting things. The first is this, which is a 60mm anamorphic lens. And then more interestingly, at least for me, is actually this here on the front, which is a 1.35 anamorphic adapter, effectively allowing you to make lenses that you already have anamorphic. Let's dive in. If at any point you want to skip ahead in the video or rewind and watch some of the stuff that we've already talked about, time codes are right here and in the playhead below. Shooting with anamorphic is very fun, and it lends itself to some really interesting and cool looks that are very sought after. This is why historically anamorphic lenses have been extremely expensive. Today's lens is not. In fact, I would consider this an entry-level lens in terms of price tag, but we're going to dive more into that here in a second. But before we do, watch what we shot with it. Today we are looking at the 60mm full frame anamorphic lens from a company called Greatjoy. Full disclosure, Greatjoy sent these to me for my review. In no way am I tied into saying anything good about them. This is going to be the honest, unadulterated truth in the way that I see and use this lens. Now again, this is full frame and it does have a t-stop of 2.9. If you're not familiar with t-stops, they're like f-stops. F-stops are for photography. T-stops are for cinematography. This lens comes in a whole host of mounts, which you can read here. The field of view is not exactly my favorite. I would prefer this to be a little wider. I'd love to see like a 40 or a 35 out of this. But again, this is probably just the first lens in an entire set that they're going to be putting together, which I would love to see. Now, the lens itself is robust. It has insanely high build quality. It's made entirely out of metal. In fact, the only thing that I can find on this that's going to be plastic is the back lens cap here. The rest of this is entirely metal. And the great part about that is that the construction is really good. The tension in my focus rings and my aperture rings are both very, very, very solid. But that said, with the anamorphic optic in the front, or the glass element in the front, mixed with this really high metal build quality, this lens gets heavy. Like pretty decently heavy, to the point to where I'd be concerned about this lens being mounted or stressing the mount on the camera body itself. Now, Greatjoy already thought about that, which is why there is this thread here at the bottom, which would work with any sort of standardized lens support system. So you can get a couple of support systems that go a couple of different ways. This one, of course, would rest on the front of the lens here, but you can also get ones that screw directly into this and then go onto a rail system. So it doesn't matter. However you want to do it, you can get it to work fine. But I think that's a very, very smart move on their part. In terms of anamorphic, this is a very low flare anamorphic lens that also does warm flaring. This has a 67mm thread on the front, which means that if you're going to be putting any filters on this camera, you're going to want to make sure that you have the appropriate step-up rings, or you have the native ones that are for 67mm. Optically, the edge-to-edge clarity on this is pretty remarkable wide open at T2.9 without having much fringing or chromatic aberration or focal vignetting where things get soft in the corners, or real vignetting for that matter. It is an incredibly built lens at that 60mm, which is probably why they went with something like a 60mm. It's much, much more difficult the more wide you get in terms of your field of view. So this being a starting lens for them makes a lot of sense. So I really like this lens. I think this lens is really, really cool. But that said, I think that this is cooler. So this is also from Greatjoy. This is their 1.35 anamorphic adapter. And believe it or not, this actually is heavier than this. And of course, that's because of our front elements here. But these two were made to go together. And in fact, you can see here that if I thread these on, they thread together just like this. Now this gets crazy heavy. I would never mount this on a camera without some sort of lens support. This is a 1.33 anamorphic and this is a 1.35 anamorphic. When it comes to squeezing or de-squeezing your anamorphics, those are not additive, they are multipliers. So a 1.35 multiplied by a 1.33 gives you a 1.8. So that actually gives you an even wider field of view than just this lens on its own. Now, the way that this works is that your taking lens, or the lens that you attach this adapter to, must be set to infinity. If you do not have this set to infinity, pulling focus off of this front here is going to become impossible. It just doesn't work. In order for this to work, whatever your taking lens is has to be set to infinity. Now, because these two are made to work together, that means that this is ideally engineered for a 60mm focal length. Now, that does not mean you cannot use other lenses, but I have an entire set of the Leica lenses, and I have tried things from the 24 to 35 all the way down to the 90, and really I can use a 50mm comfortably on full frame, but I cannot go much wider than that. The 35 and the 24 both have some serious vignetting on them where we can see kind of the actual barrel of the lens itself. So really this is, I would say, somewhere between a 50 to 60mm would be kind of the ideal to live here between these two. Because it screws on the front here with the filter, this element and this element don't always line up vertically, because of course we are talking about having this square optic or this rectangular optic on the front. You're going to want to make sure that the front optic and the taking lens are optically centered. For that, you'll see that it has these three little screws right here. These three screws, you just kind of take out by hand like this, and then you grab the front here, and you can actually slowly screw or unscrew the optics themselves from the taking lens like this. And you have a lot of room before it's actually gonna fall off, so I wouldn't worry about that. But what this is for, so this is you can line up your two optics like this, to where then you can find your optic center, and then you can type this down or tighten this down like so. The reason, by the way, that this is my favorite of these two is because then I'm able to lens it on different lenses to get different aesthetics out of the same anamorphic look. So like I have this 60mm here, which is one of my favorite Leica lenses. It's such a fascinating lens in terms of the visuals that it creates, but I also have a 50mm Canon FD, right? Or the 58mm Helios 44-2. There are a lot of really interesting lenses that have a lot of different and odd and weird and cool looks to them. So having the really interesting vintage optics of the Leica in combination with having the horizontal field of view, lens flaring, lens coating, and things that the anamorphic gives you, that combination to me makes a really, really compelling and interesting visual. I can't wait for Greatjoy to make more lenses. I think that having sharp, clean, clinical lenses is important, and I would love to see this as a set. If I could have a 60, a 40, a 24, and a 100 or 135, that would be an incredible set to have in an anamorphic. If you saw this and you thought it was helpful, do me a favor, give the video a like. If you want to see more stuff like this, hit subscribe, and as always, I'll see you in the next episode.